Well, obviously that didn't go too well. That was actually lake test number 3. If you remember lake test number 1 and 2, first one, we just kind of idled it around, made sure it didn't sink. The second one, Dave drove. We went around the lake several times with me on the laptop, looking to tune part throttle drivability. We thought we had that pretty well knocked out. At lake test number 3, I actually suited up because my intention was to hole shot the boat at a medium pace and then see if we could build some boost and what the air-fuel ratio would do. Well, the boat wouldn't even hole shot. It was misfiring bad. So we came back to the garage, I started looking at the headers, and I noticed some of the primary tubes didn't have any signs of heat in them, aka we had cylinders not firing. We ended up doing an oil change, checking the thrust bearing because we saw a little bit of dust in the oil. We basically went through this thing without tearing the motor apart, using all of our mechanicking skills to find out what was going on. And in the end, it needed a new set of injectors. We had some that just flat out weren't firing. So we're going to show you some of the things we did to troubleshoot the engine, and then we're going to go back out one more time, and we have to start over with tuning again because the brand new injectors changed the fuel flow everywhere in our map. So we've got to retune idle, part throttle, and then once again try to hole shot this thing and maybe go a little faster. That'll be the goal. This is an infrared thermometer. We're going to point this at the primary tubes of our stainless steel headers here. And as you can see by the color of them, they're not all running at the same temperature. That's what we're trying to figure out right now is why. And in the future, we'll have an exhaust gas temperature system from Holley running in this. We've already welded the bungs into the headers. The probes are in the headers. We just haven't mounted and wired the box. So in the meantime, we'll use this. Now, on an engine like this, at idle, we should be seeing 300 degrees of exhaust temp. And as you rev it up, we should see 500-600 at like 1500 RPM. We're not seeing that. We need to figure out why. So we are employing all of our basic mechanic skills right now. So look at that. This is the even side of the motor, the passenger side. It idled for 20 seconds, and number 2 is definitely dead. Because cutting the filter open and looking in the pleats, that will tell us whether this motor is destroying itself or not. Oh, let's hope not. All that work to get it running, the last thing I want to do now is rip the motor out of the boat and take it apart. It's dirty in there. That's the shortest filter I've ever seen. This filter is so short, and that's so that it'll fit between the oil filter pad of the engine and the bottom of the boat. Later on, we're going to put an adapter and then remote mount it and then use a taller filter.
I don't see nothing.
I don't either. There's a dry sump tank, and it's real close to everything, and you can't really get a traditional drain pan in there, so I'm gonna make my own drain pan. Watch this. Because I've already inspected the oil filter and the oil that came out of it, it doesn't really matter how dirty the container is that I drain the oil from the dry sump tank into, so this looks like it'll work perfect. I've already marked it. I've got 8 inches of height, and we'll just use the bandsaw here, and this ought to go through it, dun dun dun, like butter. Now, this filthy trash receptacle will hold just over 3 gallons of motor oil, which will be enough. And, more importantly, it will fit right in there. Look at that. Our repurposed trash can is working. So thrust bearing in a big block Chevy is the number 5 main bearing. It's the bearing closest to the rear of the engine, and it's got a flat surface on each end of the halves of the bearing shells, and that is what the flange rides up against. Okay, and that's what sets how much end play it has forward and backwards. And when you install one, sometimes you actually have to sand them down to get the thrust that you want. Sometimes you'll get them, they're a little thick, and you put the crank in and you realize the crank doesn't want to move at all. Well, you need a little bit of lateral movement there. So sometimes you'll sand those down to get yourself some extra thrust clearance. If you have a problem with your transmission or your engagement of whatever kind of trans you have to the back of the crankshaft isn't correct, sometimes it can push on the rear of the crankshaft, and then when the crankshaft goes forward, it will wear out that thrust bearing. And that's what we're looking for right now is the metal we see in the oil a result of something pushing on the thrust bearing and wearing it out? I don't think so, but we're going to look just.
What are we doing right now?
Right now I'm setting up a magnetic base for my dial indicator. And we're going to use this to measure how much thrust we have in our crankshaft. I'm going to put a pry bar between the block and the flange of the crank, and I'm going to move it one way. I'm going to zero my dial indicator there, and then I'm going to smack the crank towards the front of the boat with a dead blow hammer and measure how much movement it had in thousandths of an inch. And these are pretty much parallel to each other. Our dial indicator has travel in both directions. All right, so we're going to zero it, and then we'll put a pry bar there, try to move the crank backwards, then we'll try to move the crank forward, see what the needle does, and find out how much thrust we have here. Okay, so we're going to look for it to go backwards. See the needle move? So it went backwards. Looks like 0.02 of an inch. Let me see if I can get a light in here. All right. So we have 0.10 of an inch of thrust. So I think our thrust bearing is probably okay. Over the past few days, we've been playing detective, trying to figure out what's going on with Game Over. First problem we had was apparently we had some dead cylinders that weren't firing. We chased down all the wiring in the boat, found one single connector that didn't quite say, hey, I'm the root of all your problems, but we did fix it. So we brought the boat back, checked the valve lash, which told us the camshaft wasn't being wore out, checked the thrust on the crank, which told us that the thrust bearing wasn't wore out, changed the oil. We found some dust, metal dust in the oil, which could be from the engine breaking in. You know, it has very little time on it. This is only its second oil change. I'm not quite ready to say, hey, that metal dust in the oil means something in the engine is worn out, like, you know, a rod bearing or a main bearing. I don't know. But I was sitting here thinking and looking at these spark plugs and going, all right, this one here, number 7, I don't think was firing. And if it was, it wasn't doing a very good job. So I grabbed the plug wires off the boat. And these plug wires are brand new, except I remembered something. I assembled them on the floor of the SEMA show back in 2016 when this boat was there, and I didn't have the right crimp tool. I think I assembled them with a pair of pliers, just crimping them, you know, as best I could. And I grabbed number 7, which looks like that, put an ohm meter on it, and lo and behold, this thing had way more resistance than it should. These MSD spark plug wires, these are the 8.5mm ones, these should only register about 40 to 50 ohms per foot of wire. So that number 7 wire was only a foot long. It should have been about 40 to 50 ohms. It was 230 ohms. Way too high a resistance, which tells me there's probably a bad crimp going on in there. So we're going to go through all these plug wires, repair the ones that need repairing or replacing, recrimp them, put them back on there, and I think that eliminates these issues here. So I should have checked these after I built them, but I didn't have the tools to do the job right or test it afterwards on the floor of the SEMA show. But normally what you do is you assemble a set of spark plug wires, and then you do a resistance test. And all you do is take the 2 probes of your digital multimeter, set the thing to ohms, and it should show you how many ohms of resistance there is there. Now this is set on 2000. If we go to 200, there we go. 91 ohms. Now this wire is about 10 inches there, another 12 there. It's not quite 2 feet long, and if you go by the rule of 40 to 50 ohms per foot, this should be about 100 ohms, right? Well, it's registering 90. So this wire works. But check out this other wire. This one here, I think, is the one that came off of either number 7 or number 2. Might have been number 2. That one's not even making a connection. 231 ohms for a wire that's not even 2 feet long. That's no bueno. This is the one I think that came off of number 2 or number 7, 2 of our cylinders that seemed like they pretty much weren't firing, and I think that's the culprit right there. So we're going to replace all these wires and then push the boat outside of the garage, fire it up again, use our infrared heat gun to see if we've got temp in our primary tubes, and then I don't know. I don't believe these spark plugs are totally wasted. In the past, we've actually taken these that looked really fouled and stuck them in the bead blaster and cleaned them with some soda. But we just got this new machine. It's called an ultrasonic cleaner. And I'm going to put these in here for about 10 minutes. And does that just go? Yeah, it does. I'm going to put these in here for 10 minutes. Turn it on, and the soap solution should. Whoa. Yeah, so it's bombarding the spark plugs with ultrasonic waves that should break the carbon up off the plug. And you can use it for almost anything, like rocker arms, you know, ferrous metals, alloys, like
Carburetor.
you could dump a carburetor will fit in here, like a Dominator carb will fit in this machine. So we're gonna leave that in for 10 minutes and see how clean the plugs come out. Look at that. Those are those spark plugs, the ones that were all sooty. 10 minutes in the ultrasonic machine, all the soot is gone. We can put these right back into service because they had very little runtime on them. And so the electrode in the center there, it's not even rounded off, not even worn yet. We just cleaned the soot off so that now, since we have a properly functioning fuel injection and ignition system, this thing should run on these plugs again. Last time we were out here, I told you I had these nifty shorts, and they're called ballistic shorts. I think they have Kevlar in them, but essentially they protect you if you crash the boat and go swimming at a high rate of speed. And you know, if we were at a drag boat race, I'd be wearing a fire suit, but we're not, because I'm surrounded by water, and if I wreck the boat, I'm gonna end up in the water. And swimming in a fire suit kind of sucks. And since there's no rescue boat here or anything like that, I tend not to wear a fire suit when I go lake testing. But because we are going to go a little faster today, I am going to wear the rest of my gear, which again consists of this Lifeline jacket that has leg restraints built into it. This is to keep the jacket on you when you hit the water going really fast. And then I think I'm pretty sure I mentioned it before. It's got a parachute built into the back of it that I hope to never in my life leave.
So I was curious as to how that worked, and I hopped on YouTube and found a video of a guy that he was halfway between his run, and that thing come out like accidentally and just ripped him out of the boat.
Yeah, that's a pretty famous video. What Dave's talking about is the guy had a jacket on just like this, his hauling butt. I think he was in a V-drive boat, and he's hauling butt, and this ripcord is tethered to the boat. Well, I don't know what happened in his deal, but his chute opened while he was going probably 100. Parachute blossomed, and it just ripped him out of the boat. And yeah, you don't want that to happen.
He did go feet first. It did work.
It did work?
Oh yeah.
That's great. I've seen pictures of dudes landing feet first, but I've also seen half a dozen crashes where guys wadded up their boats, and this chute, you know, didn't really help them much. But whatever. We have it. We're going to employ it if need be. Whew! Test session number 4. Okay, here's a quick recap of what happened. Test session number 1, just make sure it floats and runs. We did that. Test session number 2, we putted around the lake, high-fiving each other. Test session number 3, this thing was misfiring like you wouldn't believe and loading up the spark plugs, but not all of them. Went back home, troubleshooted all the wiring, troubleshooted the spark plug wires. Ultimately, the problem we had were bad injectors in this thing. And for what reason, I don't know. But we replaced the entire set of injectors. Suddenly, at idle, this thing was pig fat and fouling spark plugs again. So we had to start over on our fuel map. We took 10 pounds per hour of fuel out of the base map at idle. And now we're about to go back out there and start over with our cruise map, readjusting all of that, because all of this is probably too rich, given that now we have full flowing injectors in here. We have more fuel. Possibly we need to cruise. So we haven't even gotten to the wide open part yet, but I'm hoping today we can make it idle, we can make it roll over on plane, we can burp the throttle a little bit and look at the air fuel, and if it's safe, I'll mat it for a few seconds. We'll find out what's going to happen. And for those that are wondering, those are 860 pound per hour injectors, which should be enough to feed about 2,000 horsepower. Is this motor capable of making more? Yeah. If we ever get to that point, we'll put some 220s in there. But for those that you are wondering, yes, one set of 8 injectors will feed this thing at its current configuration, which is real low boost. It's set up for 6 pounds, nothing else. So let's put it in the water. Let's find out how it works.
It sounds so good.
Dude, it's sick. It is an animal. Like I still haven't even been able to go wide open because I'm just staring at the air fuel going, okay, please be okay, please be okay.
Did everything look okay?
Everything seems good. Like it's a little fat up top, but that was, I think it was 5,500 RPM. There's another 4 or 5 sitting there. I mean, it's bananas, dude. It pulls hard. I'm gonna pick you up and then we'll go over because everything's hot. We don't have heat shields on it. I don't want to melt the fiberglass. Next time. I found my sunglasses. There's the bilge of the boat all the way to the back.
Kind of ran out of fuel by ourselves in the middle of the lake, and nobody's here because everybody's quarantining. I live adjacent to a lake. I live at a lake. There's nobody here. We're kind of quarantined. Downside of that is we just ran out of gas. Yeah. Come out here on a jet ski or inner tube, anything.
It does run better though.
We definitely have 8 cylinders.
Oh my god, I shouldn't be up here.
So that's not very big at all. So what is that? About 20 minutes of runtime?
Yeah, we were like 25 minutes out here total.
All right. Hey,
It could have been worse.